My name is Dr. Ian Storch. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and osteopathic physician, and you are listening to Do or Do Not. If you are interested in joining our team or have suggestions or comments, please contact us at doordonotpodcast.com. Share our link with your friends and like us on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you enjoy this episode.
For our grand finale episode for 2021 Black History Month, we are privileged to be able to speak with Dr. Darnita Anderson Hill. Dr. Hill is the daughter of Dr. William Anderson, a civil rights leader who we interviewed in the first episode. Dr. Hill decided she wanted to become a physician at a young age and ultimately applied to both MD and DO schools. She ultimately found a strong connection with the ideals of osteopathic medicine and attended the Michigan State University College of Osteopathic Medicine. Dr. Hill trained in family practice, staying deeply connected with osteopathic medicine principles and practice. Dr. Hill's connection with both osteopathic medicine and her African American heritage led her on a spiritual journey spanning from Kirksville, Missouri to Jonesville, Virginia, the birthplace of Andrew Taylor Still, the founder of osteopathy. Dr. Hill has authored a book entitled Blacks in Osteopathic Medicine, an idea whose time has come. In this comprehensive book, she intertwines the history of osteopathic medicine with the history of African Americans in medicine. It is truly an amazing book and we believe a must-read for all medical students and physicians, MD and DO alike. In this interview, Dr. Hill comments on history but also offers insight into how we can better represent minorities, specifically African Americans, in osteopathic medical schools, and what African American students can do to learn more about our profession. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Hi, Dr. Hill. Thank you so much for joining us on Valentine's Day.
Thank you for the invitation, Ian. I look forward to speaking on your program.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you. As you know, this is our closing Black History Month episode, and we felt that you are absolutely perfect to finish out the month for us.
Thank you. I'm honored to be a part.
Darnita, I wanted to start, we usually start by talking about you and what a normal day looks like for you, but I really want to start talking about your book, if that's okay.
That's perfectly fine. Yeah, it's a topic I'm passionate about.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And I actually just got a copy of the book yesterday from Amazon, and I'm like engrossed. So I think our listeners are going to be very excited to hear about it.
All right, I'm ready to go.
So can you tell us the title of the book and what gave you the inspiration to write the book?
Yes, the title is Blacks in Osteopathic Medicine, an idea whose time has come. This is I call it a research project because I began to do an independent study on osteopathic medicine. I would say as I entered into practice in the 1990s, I realized that there were elements missing in my osteopathic medical education. I grew up in a family that was that were high, they were highly involved, my parents in particular, in the civil rights movement. I was taught Black history from a young age. It was really my whole experience, even though I grew up in an ethnically diverse environment. And as I merged my osteopathic experience with my upbringing and those things that happened with my parents, of course, during the civil rights movement, there were bomb threats against their home. I remember my mother crying in the hallway when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. So all these things compounded into this one theme on Blacks, African Americans in particular, and osteopathic medicine.
That's amazing. I mean, it's just amazing that you wrote a book specifically addressing, yeah, and again, I'm about halfway through. In the last 24 hours, I can't put it down. And it's so interesting that it's osteopathy specifically, and then added to it or layered into it is the Black history of medicine and osteopathy.
Yes. Yeah. And I have to say, I don't mean to break your flow, I hope, but I was chided a bit when I first began writing. I presented it to someone, an older osteopathic physician, and they said, "Well, why is this osteopathy?" Because I heard you say that, and I do use the word osteopathy, and sometimes I use osteopathic medicine. And I don't know if some of the younger osteopathic physicians and students, if they are aware that the word osteopathy was used up until around the mid 1960s. So that's another subject matter because some of the osteopathic professionals, supporters, they feel that perhaps something was lost or diluted when the profession began using osteopathic medicine. But yes, the combination of both subject matters are confluent and they work to address some of those, I would say, I call them stereotypes and discriminatory factors that we have dealt with in, of course, racism in America and also osteopathic medicine as a profession and a science. It has been misunderstood in many ways, but we can go further into that also.
Yeah, Darnita, I think, we spoke briefly when we were talking about doing the interview, and I thought it was so interesting, just your own story. Maybe we'll start there if that's okay. Yeah, where you went to undergraduate and when you decided you wanted to go to medical school and how you decided on osteopathic school.
I grew up in an osteopathic family. And what does that mean? That means my father, first of all, who most of you know, and actually you interviewed him, I think a few episodes ago, Dr. William G. Anderson. And he, of course, an influential person anyway in the entire profession, but as a family man, as a father, as a friend to many and a physician to many in our community in Detroit. I honestly, I knew no other modality of care except for osteopathic medicine. I've been to so many conventions, also all of the friends of my father and their wives, their children, we were all friends, we were close, we were like family. So that was my upbringing. My decision to go into the medical field actually didn't occur probably until high school or early college years. And I knew that I wanted to be a physician, but the osteopathic aspect of it that was not firm in my mind until third, fourth year of college because I also applied to MD schools. But I knew I wanted a different type of healthcare education, medical training. And believe it or not, I applied to Oral Roberts. I don't know if you would remember that medical school. I don't even know if it's open, but I always had an interest in natural therapy, holistic aspects, and Oral Roberts was a very popular minister back in the 70s and 80s. I'm not sure if the school is still active. So, anyway, I've always inclined toward the more holistic approach. And that was part of my desire. As when my father said, don't you know that I'm an osteopathic physician? That's what we do. We have another therapeutic that we use besides, of course, medication and surgery. And anyway, that kind of inclined me then to go ahead and pursue an osteopathic medical education. And I have to say this, Ian, before we go on, and I should have gone back to the very beginning, but I was born in Albany, Georgia, and the doctor who assisted my mother in my delivery was the first documented Black male osteopathic physician in the country. His name was Dr. William Reese. He had a place in his clinic. I was born in his office. And at that time, Blacks were not allowed to be admitted into most of the hospitals in the South. This was in the 1960s. And that was, again, another influence into my choosing osteopathic medicine. In fact, it was Dr. Reese who influenced my father into pursuing osteopathic medical education in the 1950s.
It's amazing. So you were like literally born to be an osteopath, right? You could say.
Absolutely. I didn't have a choice, did I?
No choice.
Uh-huh.
Darnita, you mentioned, in the foreword of your book, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. In the foreword of your book, you mentioned that, maybe even osteopathic students going to school today don't have, and we talked about this a little bit previously, don't have a good foundation in the history of osteopathy. When did you become so interested in the history of osteopathy? And can you tell us a little bit about your journey digging into osteopathy itself for the project of writing the book?
I stumbled across books that were directly pertaining to the life, the history, the philosophy that was established by Dr. Andrew Taylor Still. Now, most osteopathic medical students, once they step into the doors of their school, they oftentimes are that at that point they're introduced to some of the history that pertain to Andrew Taylor Still, maybe Kirksville, Missouri, that day and time. And they'll see quotes such as, "It is the object of the physician to find health, that anyone can find disease." I know that's a popular quote by Dr. A.T. Still. Well, I actually took it upon myself to go a little bit deeper into the life of this man. And I think what was so astonishing is that if you really look at what he he quoted, but this is how he spoke most of the time. I'm going to give you another example. He says, "God is the father of osteopathy, and I'm not ashamed of the child of his mind." And you have to consider, wow, well, you don't hear most physicians speaking in this manner. And Dr. A.T. Still, those who have had a chance to read some of the history, we know that he was a minister, he was a farmer, activist, and more. He had an interesting upbringing. Dr. He was just Andrew Taylor Still at that time. He was born in 1828. He was born to Abraham Still, who was his father. He was a Methodist minister, a circuit rider, very, very religious, very strict. His whole family had that type of upbringing. He was made to serve on Indian territories, in missionaries, which at that time was very tenuous. It was dangerous, of course, because of the racial climate. Also for Native Americans, as back in the 1800s, 1700s, as the American lands were being established. So anyway, but the reason I'm giving that history, and that history was important for me to go back and study, as I was getting into really the mind and heart of who this man, A.T. Still, was. He had so many elements in his own life. He actually, not only spiritually, but he had actual tragedies by losing 5 children. I know he lost 3 children from his first wife. His first wife, she also perished, and it was due to uh, just illnesses at that time. Mostly they were infectious. He also lost 2 other children from his second wife, and this was his motivation into osteopathy. He realized that the empirical treatments of his time, which consisted of toxic chemicals such as mercury and arsenic, and they performed bloodletting. He said that they caused more harm than good. And also, he was a slave abolitionist. His father was a slave abolitionist also. So all of these elements caused him to adopt a more almost it was spiritual, but it was eclectic. He was into modalities of care that made people in that time call him a quack, and they said, "Oh, they made fun of him." And so I thought that these things were important because he developed a science that was beneficial. No matter what people thought about his dress, his lifestyle, some of the terms that he used, we are not even given, in my opinion, in our osteopathic medical education, we're not given the opportunity to explore the science, the substance of the science, because sometimes we are kind of thrown aback by the life that he lived, which at that time was very difficult. It was very rough, but and I can go on and on with this, but he practiced his art and his science and his healing in a very non-discriminate way. That also stood out for me because there are only a few books that give that personal side to Dr. A.T. Still's life. But what I learned was that he did not make a difference in his patients. He did not discriminate. He would treat the poor person, and he would treat someone who was Black without concern of their station in life or their race. And these accounts are frequent and often in books. Particularly one is by one of his good friends, Dr. Hildreth, which you can then, I don't think that book is in print anymore, but you have to find some of these materials in some of the archived books of certain libraries. But did that answer the question? I feel like I ran on a little.
No, that's amazing. And I think, again, for our listeners, and we're going to explore more into some of the nuances of the book, but I think that's the whole history of osteopathy that you talk about is part of who we are. And I think it's what makes us special, and the philosophy that was given to us by A.T. Still. So to get just a little bit about the journey, you traveled, right? And you had to find these resources to write the book, right? You went to Kirksville, I read, and a few other places to find this information, right? It wasn't forthcoming when you wrote.
No, not at all. You're actually you're on your own in this journey, especially if you're like me. I'm just a average family medicine physician. I don't have any special position in the osteopathic profession. I did serve a little time in academia, but you're not going to go to your average library and you're not going to find hardly any information on the history of osteopathic medicine. And of course, at the time that I embarked on this, we did not have the digital resources at hand. So I traveled to Chicago. That was a frequent trip because I was allowed to attend. No, I didn't attend. I would go with my father to, there's a House of Delegates meeting from the osteopathic profession, and that's every summer in Chicago. And also, many of the major osteopathic conventions were held in Chicago also. And because that was the headquarters, they would give tours. You're welcome to go to the AOA, American Osteopathic Association building, which was downtown Chicago. And in that building, there was a very small library and a kind librarian named Ida. And so the first time I visited, you can present whatever information you're looking for to her, and she would run a thorough check in the library, and then it could take a few days, and she would get back with you and hand it to you. So I asked her specifically about African American or Blacks in the osteopathic profession. And it's an interesting little library because there are primarily journals. If you the profession rather, we don't have a lot of books, which I think it could be a good thing, but it tells me that it's an evolutionary process. It's a science that has really a lot of growing to do because we don't have the books. We have books on osteopathic manipulative therapy, but we don't necessarily on osteopathic medicine or osteopathy as a science and art that can be drawn to the history. So what you'll find in this particular library are a lot of journals that were written back in the 1800s. There were papers, some are bound, some are not bound. So I believe that was the difficulty, even in identifying information that may have stated that there was someone Black or someone of a different nationality. And she only found maybe 2 items for me. And now I'm going to mention at this point that one of the items I thought was really fascinating. There was a osteopathic school that was founded by an African American or a Black, supposedly an osteopathic physician, and it was called the Colored School of Osteopathic Medicine. And I thought, yeah, that's amazing. But that was in the early 1920s. And another osteopathic physician, I had mentioned it, and they said, oh, that was just a diploma mill. And at that time, I'd never heard of a diploma mill, but I learned that was a school that is started up that's not necessarily certified. Nonetheless, I thought that was interesting that someone made that attempt. Anyway, I mentioned that in my book. Also, after that time, and Ida, she helped me as much as she could, and she advised me to go to Kirksville, Missouri, to the A.T. Still University of Health Sciences, as it's called now. And that was a trip that I planned, I would say approximately 6 months later. A.T. School, College of Osteopathic Medicine in Kirksville I'm going to tell you, it's absolutely amazing. And I call it the Mecca School. I think every osteopathic student and physician and supporter needs to travel there to take a look, to tour the campus, to tour the town. Dr. A.T. still has statues around the city. There are banners where he is honored throughout this whole area. And that was great inspiration for me. And that was another place where I found a lot of information that I also have, and I don't know if Ian wants to ask anything specific, but that kind of off probably the next 80% of some of the research that I was able to obtain about Blacks in osteopathic medicine.
Darnita, the whole journey in osteopathy is amazing. I want to take a step back and shift gears a little bit. In the book, I think that is so important for us to take a better look at in 2021 are things about Black history in the United States that make us uncomfortable, right? Because there are so many things that should make us feel uncomfortable. We obviously don't like to feel uncomfortable, but it's so important because it's what happened and it's history. So in the book, one of the earlier chapters, you just talk about Blacks and the history of medicine, and specifically the history of medicine in America. And you talk about the way Blacks were treated as slaves and medical treatment as slaves, and talk a little bit about things like Tuskegee, which is just horrible. And we don't, even reading about it makes me, again, just viscerally uncomfortable. Can you talk about those things a little bit?
Sure. Yes, and you're right, Ian, to thank you for that question, and that you have that's empathy, that you feel that, because I was a little discomforted at times having to review that history, but that's something that we must review. And I want to cite an incident that when I was growing up, my this was around the time that the movie Roots, the series Roots, was being played on television. And I remember that I was in around seventh grade, eighth grade, and things were very tense in the country because that was before internet. So all we had was television. And if there was a good series on, we would all go home and we'd say, okay, let's get ready to watch. And that whole series brought to life a lot of the impacts of slavery that we have been taught about in school, but to visualize it and to see it played out in cinema put another impact. It gave it another impact. And so I remember going to school, and I had a teacher. He he was a white male, and he told the class that, and I think that was part of the discussion, this series called Roots. And he made the statement that slavery was, he said it was not so bad. The slave was able to, had a place to sleep and to eat. And I remember, of course, it didn't sit well with me for any of us on the line who has watched that entire series. But I went home and I told my father, and of course, my father, civil rights activist, walked with Dr. Martin Luther King, and he was very upset. And he immediately scheduled a meeting, and he went and he ended up giving a lecture to the class on Black history and the impact of slavery in America and what it did, the trauma that it left behind for many African Americans. And going to your point about the medical experimentation in America that has been inflicted primarily on Black and African Americans has left an enormous scar and has left a tremendous level of distrust for the traditional American medical system. And it's interesting that in the news, I guess everyone has been made aware now of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, which I mentioned, and most people highlight that particular really an atrocity. Not that it was, I wouldn't say it was the most, if I can say that, if not the most harsh experiment, but it was the most bold and overt atrocity in terms of medical experimentation. And it is really it's just incredibly sad to think that this went on for 40 years. I just kind of shake and think, how in the world from 1932 to 1972 that this was happening in this town of Tuskegee, Alabama. And someone must have known, the public health department. They had come in initially and had been doing testing on syphilis in the Black community in this area. And I would have to say, when we talk about medical experimentation, the one of the best books is called Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington. And she has this is the absolutely most comprehensive book that outlines all she at least has hundreds of experiments that have occurred in America. And some of them have also lingered into Central America and some other third world countries. And I have to say that many poor whites are included, Hispanic. So it's not limited to African Americans, but the mass majority of these atrocities in medical science and research have occurred against the African American Blacks. And I'm going to follow that with saying that that is that's to the upliftment of osteopathic medicine. And I think you said it, Ian. It is a special practice of medicine. It's a special science, and that emanates from its founder and the founding of it. So it does not have a history of this. Now, things always change as we look into what we call modern medicine and highly advanced and evidence-based and clinical research. But historically, we can be proud as an osteopathic profession and as osteopathic physicians that was not a part of our history. So thank you for that question.
No, thank you for the answer. And again, thank you for the book is amazing. I mean, there's so much in the book. I think you did a great job. I have a long queue, and obviously I started the book because I knew I was going to interview you and I was interested, but after I started it, I've been walking around with the book for the last 2 days attached to my hip. Just going along with something that you said, and again, kind of veering off topic just a little bit, you said in the preface to the book, you said, I've always had a keen perception that I wanted to be a different kind of doctor. I'm just quoting the book. The title of physician or healer should not be claimed by those practitioners of health whose constraint for time thwarted the thorough exam and proper care of his or her patients, and who prescribe medication as a primary modality of treatment, did not consider the spiritual element pertaining to health, displayed an unpleasant or indifferent bedside manner, and placed the quest for financial gain ahead of serving others. In my view, these qualities are the embodiment of selfish gain and are antithetical to holistic care. Health is the right of every individual. I think that myself and the Do or Do Not podcast group fully echo everything that you said in that passage, and I don't think you could have said it better. And specifically, we recently appeared on another podcast where some MDs were answering the question of, can a DO do a specialty such as neurosurgery or orthopedics? We could have just answered it with that passage.
Yes. And we can do that and more. I'm not sure if the question was, are we qualified to engage ourselves in some of the more intricate specialties? Was that the impetus for their question? Or
That's again, Darnita, I think exactly that my answer, which I think you would agree with, was yes, we can do all those things. But if you're looking at, a Medscape salary list in choosing what you want to do with your life, you may be choosing the wrong profession.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, our founder, Dr. A.T. Still, that was his motivation. There are stories, and I have these, gets a little bit, say, not on the fringe, because sometimes we're scared because we're nervous, because people might think, oh, I don't know, now you're going off away from science. But I think the point you bring up is that how do you separate what's, I would say, what's human, what is compassion? I don't, you can't, how could you look at anyone's color or station in life and say, oh no, I wouldn't, I wouldn't have them because they are, you don't even make that uh, that doesn't go into the equation. So, just what you're saying, and I think osteopathic physicians, I just spoke with someone just 3 days ago, and it was a young man and he's a PhD in chemistry and nanopolymer technology, very advanced. And he said, I was thinking about going back to medical school. And he said he was talking to some of his MD friends, and he was thinking about attending an osteopathic school. And he said his friends said, oh, no, they're not, I don't think as they're not as qualified. Their training is, in other words, it's substandard. And while I was disheartened at that, I wasn't really, because I think a lot of us have experienced that. And what we have to do is learn to defend our, it really defend who we are. And my father is one who's gave many speeches, but he always spoke of being proud about being an osteopathic practitioner. And it's the same with whatever your race is, whatever your ethnicity, religion is, that we learn to grow in this and we learn to celebrate our diversity. And I really, and I'm going to kind of divert a little bit too, because I wanted to thank you and applaud you, Ian, and your team for putting this podcast together, because I have been listening. I have been scrolling through some of the speakers, and it is really amazing. It is a book in and of itself. And I told I think it was my husband I was talking to, I said, some people, either you can write a book or you can be a book. And when I said that, I mean that putting a platform like this together, it is a book. It's writing volumes for us to take. These are processes in our thinking where we can evolve, we can grow, and we can take this whole thing to another level.
Darnita, first of all, thank you very much. That is a huge compliment. We appreciate it. My follow-up question. So again, going back to the book, which I would highly recommend anyone listening to the podcast to read, because I think it gives you information, again, deeply about the philosophy of osteopathy. And again, I think that quote just highlights your insight into what it means to be a physician in general. But when we talk about Black history and Black history of osteopathy, of course, you talk about probably the most in-depth, definitely the most in-depth analysis of contributions of African Americans. And we have been super fortunate to have your dad, William Anderson, who was just a privilege for me to speak with. And one of the students on the podcast was able to interview Barbara Ross Lee, who is amazing. My question for you is, what do you think the osteopathic community should be doing, or do you think that there's more that they should be doing to bring African American students into the profession? And on the other side, do you think African American students should pay more attention to osteopathic medicine? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, excellent question. And to answer your last question first, yes, absolutely, that our Black students should pay more attention. However, they are not given the opportunity to explore the osteopathic medical education as distinct from the allopathic medical track. That is an issue. I believe that that was a question that was presented years ago to one of the osteopathic journals. And the question was asked, why aren't more African American students applying to the osteopathic schools? Well, there's several issues, it's multifactorial. However, many of the better students overlook the osteopathic medical schools. If they're Black and they're at the top of their class, a lot of times they're able to get scholarships into some of the MD schools, or the cost of going to the MD schools, I believe it or not, are a lot less than some of the osteopathic colleges of medicine. That is one of the issues. Another one is that if we don't really diversify, I mean, like visibly diversify some of the osteopathic colleges of medicine, this does not they're not attractive to an African American student. They're probably not attracted to Hispanic or Asian. That's something that I think any student would consider if they're matriculating through any type of higher education, even undergraduate and college. Everyone wants to feel like they have someone who's that they can relate to, that they can bond with, study with, and that is something that can be worked upon. Another suggestion that I make, and I know, and I'm kind of one that likes to go to the other end, to the other extreme, and I don't think it really is, but I suggested that why not a Black College of Osteopathic Medicine? Now, some might think that's really radical, way out, but it's not really when you consider at one time in history, well, not at one time, over a century, that the historically Black colleges and universities were being established in America. And the primary reason was because Blacks were not allowed an education up into the early 1900s. So we're looking at a span of a little over 100 years that many Black African Americans were given the opportunity to go to college, let alone to go to a medical school. And of course, under the Flexner report, which many of us know of, that it wiped out Black medical colleges. There used to be 14, believe it or not, but under Flexner, there were 7. He closed 5. And so 2 were left by the 1930s, 40s, 50s. And then one more was established. So that's a total of 3 Black medical schools. And I think there's room to look at a Black osteopathic college. There was talk of an area, I won't say because I just heard a glimmer about it, that they were trying to establish an osteopathic school that it sounded like it might capture some of the underserved, which could include Black, Hispanic, and others, but I can't speak any more on that, but that is another suggestion, Ian. So there are a few things that can be done to address these disparities that are prevalent amongst African American students.
That's amazing. Again, Darnita, your breadth of knowledge and understanding is just spectacular. And thank you so much for spending time with us tonight.
Oh, you're so welcome. And Ian, I have to say, I I feel like what I did in writing the book, I was obligated, and you're right, it was part of my destiny because I stand on the backs of a lot of these great ones that include those two you mentioned, my father, Dr. William G. Anderson, and Dr. Barbara Ross Lee, because she was my mentor and one of my professors in medical school. So I thank you too. I really do. This has been wonderful.
Darnita, just one last question, if you don't mind, before we wrap up. If there is a minority student, an African American student listening to the podcast that's interested in osteopathic medicine, can you give them some advice?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I would I would urge them to first be certain that osteopathic medicine is something that you want to explore. What I have found that many times I am recommended to speak with African American students, and to be honest, they want to be physicians and they're not necessarily looking at the different philosophies and modalities, and that's not their fault because for the most part the MD and DOs, the merger has occurred. I think the date was 2020. So we are now looking at a time period where I think it's important that we have to maintain our distinction as osteopathic physicians. And so that's one thing that the African American student who is looking at the osteopathic school can do. And then secondly, of course, is to be firm in your studies in undergraduate, in your sciences, in your mathematics courses, and of course, because you can't get around that, even though there there's more talk, and I think rightfully so, that what makes a well-rounded physician. Well, it's not always the top MCAT score and the top science score. So, just make sure you're well rounded. Make sure you're going to medical school for the right reasons and don't give up. Keep pushing ahead. You speak to some osteopathic physicians. There are enough African American physicians that you can speak to. They can be your mentors. They're happy. Most are open and looking to mentor some of these young potential osteopathic medical students.
It's funny, as you were speaking, first of all, the advice is perfect. I don't think you could have said it any better. But as you were speaking, what came to my mind is something that William Anderson said, who obviously has influenced you. He said, keep your eye on the prize and hold on. They're saying the same thing in a different way, right?
Come on. I love it because do you know what? Do you know that's what he used to tell me when I grew up or growing up? And sometimes I was upset because I was complaining and I said, oh, this is not going right and this is too hard. He sat me down. He said, Dee Dee, that's what he calls me. He said, you keep your eye on the prize. So thank you for bringing that up. That's excellent. This has been a tremendous broadcast, and I've enjoyed your questions, and I've enjoyed speaking with you.
Darnita, I've enjoyed speaking with you also. And again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ian.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there's someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tianyu Shea. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do or Do Not.